Merhaba. This video is about one more adverbial suffix, yep. Okay, so you remember you learned one, Inja, last semester. And so when you add an adverbial, first of all, you bring two sentences together with them. And each one has a different function. With Inja, you bring two sentences together, giving the meaning that two actions of these two sentences happen almost at the same time. Eve gidince beni ara. When you go home, call me. It's not clear in English when you translate it. Because in Turkish it's clear. It's like once you do come home, once you go home, you call me. It just happens at the same time. With yip, there's a little bit of difference, which is important. It gives the meaning of simultaneous or successive actions. Okay, so I'll talk about it. It's going to make more sense. But before that, just to remind you, the adverbial attached to the verb. First of all, for the verb, you need to get rid of the tense, mood, personal endings, all of them. You go to the root and add the adverbial. Gitmek, gidince. Gidince doesn't have tense, mood, or personal endings. You don't need them because the main clause will give you that information. Okay? Let's study a little bit with the yip. Let's work with yip. Okay, from this example maybe. Markete gidip yarım kilo peynir alacağım. Markete gidip yarım kilo peynir alacağım. I'll go to the market and buy half a kilo of cheese. Right? So, markete gidip alacağım. So how is this, what is this sentence? There are two sentences in it, first of all. The first one, markete gideceğim. The second one, yarım kilo peynir alacağım. Right? So these are two sentences, and then they are combined with yip. How? The first sentence, the verb of the first sentence is brought to the stem, and the yip is attached to it. Markete gidip. Now it's not a complete sentence anymore. Once you add the adverbial, it's half a sentence. And then so you need the second one to finish it. Markete gidip yarım kilo peynir alacağım. Right? So there is a sequence of actions here. You see? You first go to the market and then buy the cheese. It doesn't happen the other way around, right? You buy the cheese, go to the market. It doesn't work like that. So it's a perfect use of yip. First you go and then buy the cheese. So this is exactly what yip does. Okay. Sınav sonuçlarına bakıp karar verecekler. They'll look at the exam results and make a decision. So in this example, it can be simultaneous or successive, but definitely the first action comes first, even if, just half a second earlier. Because you cannot make a decision before you look at the exam results, right? So that's why there's a sequence, even if it's like happening almost at the same time. So, there are like other examples in your books. You should look at them. So this is a good one, for instance. Ayşe dün eve dönmeyip annesinde yattı. So in this example, which means Ayşe didn't return home yesterday and slept at her mother's, the yip adverbial is attached to the negative stem. So stem plus negative and then the adverbial dönmeyip, not returning. These are very hard to translate into English, right? So it can be attached to negative verbs, okay? It can be the other way around. For instance, bana dönüp bakmadı. So he hasn't turned and looked at me. In English, you actually use one hasn't negative and then it applies to two of them. Just like that in Turkish. Bana dönüp bakmadı. He didn't look at me. Turned and looked at me. So, so it can happen both ways. Negative comes into picture. When you use yip, you shouldn't use the anymore. It will be redundant and it will be not correct. For instance, eve gidip ders çalışacağım. Go home and study. Eve gidip ve ders çalışacağım is wrong. You don't need it. Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. So, so you don't use the, even though when you translate into English, you use the, right? So don't be confused with that. I mean, translations are always confusing. All right, so when do you see yip the most? Well, I think when you hear a story, a recipe, which requires a sequence of actions, it appears a lot. For instance, ıspanağı yıkayıp doğrayın. Wash the spinach and chop them. So, you know, first you wash them and then chop them. Tuz ekleyip karıştırın. Add salt and stir. Again, like, you know, there's a sequence of actions in this recipe. So, you know, they follow each other. I don't know if you should chop the spinach before or after, but the recipe says that you should wash it and then chop it. And it's important for the recipes, right? You know, what you do first and next, and the so the sequence is important. I think the difference between Inja and yip is clear, but let me just say a few things about that to make it even more clear. The main difference is Inja gives the meaning of the simultaneous action. It happens at the same time. For instance, here's a good example. Onu okulda görünce çok şaşırdı. When she saw him at school, she was surprised very much. So you see that, you know, she sees him, she saw him, and she was surprised. So it happens at the same time. Right? As she sees him, she was surprised. So this is a perfect situation for Inja. Onu görünce çok şaşırdı. Right? And I wouldn't use yip here. Onu görüp çok şaşırdı. It just doesn't work. Okay? Even though it's not wrong, but it just doesn't work. Okay? Well, so, you know, you see the difference here. And so I hope it's helpful. You know, similarly, you can say ıspanakları yıkayıp doğrayın. You know, ıspanakları yıkayınca doğrayın. I mean, yeah, once, you know, when you wash the spinach and chop them, you see, it doesn't work. I mean, it's actually you just, languages are like that. When you use it in the right way, it just feels right. And so my advice for yip and Inja, use Inja for simultaneous actions, yip for sequence actions. When you see in your readings that sometimes, you know, yip appears almost simultaneous actions, don't be surprised. Okay? So that's all for this week. And so, you know, study again the examples in your books and do your worksheets. If you have questions, we'll talk in class. Tamam? Kolay gelsin. Görüşürüz.